Kit Malthouse.
Madam Deputy Speaker, like others in this House, I'm frankly astonished at the statement of the Foreign Secretary. At a time when we've got daily lynchings and expulsions on the West Bank, dozens being murdered as they beg for aid, I'm just beyond words, really, at his inaction and, frankly, complicity by inaction at what is going on. He himself said there's a massive prison camp being constructed in the south of Gaza. He knows that leading genocide scholars from across the world now are ringing the alarm bells, and yet he has the temerity to show up to this House and wave his chequebook as if it's going to salve his conscience. Can he not see that his inaction and, frankly, cowardice is making this country irrelevant? Can he also not see the personal risk to him, given our international obligations, that he may end up at The Hague because of his inaction? And finally, really frankly, an appeal to the Labour backbenchers. We can't get your leadership to change their minds. Only you can, if you organise and insist on change.
That was Tory MP Kit Malthouse accusing Labour MP David Lammy, UK Foreign Secretary, actually, David Lammy, about complicity in this genocide. If you want to know where we are in July of 2025. Hello, David.
Hey, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, despite, the absolute horror show that is even making Tories sound like human rights, activists. But that's where we're at right now. I mean, just to get right into it, I want to play this clip from Cindy McCain talking on CNN about Israeli troops firing on crowds of hungry people in Palestine.
This is one of the worst tragedies we've seen so far in this particular war. What happened was we had clearance to go through the Zakim gate. We were through the gate. The Israelis had, as you know, they clear everything and they decide when and if you go in. And we began our trek down the road, and what we saw were thousands of people running towards us, and they were hungry. They're starving. And all of a sudden, the Israeli tanks, Israeli guns, Israeli weapons from all kinds started firing on the crowd. And it was just, it's something that I hope never happens again. But more importantly, our group, WFP, our people that work for us were there too, and they were put in grave danger as a result of that. No humanitarian aid worker should ever be a target of anything.
Well, this follows a trend over the last 2 months where over 800 Palestinians have been killed around aid distribution sites. The majority of those are at the controversial US-backed and Israel-supported Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Can you be very specific? Are you coordinating in any way or supporting in any way that operational model? And what is your view on the GHF?
Well, we are not coordinating, and we do not work with GHF. As you know, we're a UN agency, and so we have our UN, the way the UN operates is different from what GHF is doing. I don't really have any information about them at all because we don't even talk.
So 800 cited there by the CNN journalist. That number is actually up today, not only because 25 more people were killed today near aid sites. This new article by the Washington Post, Israeli forces kill over 1,000 aid seekers in Gaza as hunger worsens. That's since May. 100,000 Palestinians attempting to obtain food in the Gaza Strip. Of these deaths, 766 of them near aid sites operated by this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, Israeli-backed contractor with also American help as well. And this is in a time of acute starvation. Not that hasn't really been going on for a long time, but you see people reaching the absolute breaking point to the point where you have 20-odd EU countries saying the slow drip of food or whatever is not tenable and bad. Well, you know what? Sanction Israel. You got to sanction Israel, and this can start to happen. These we're really upset to hear about the challenges, and also Israel is too many civilians are dying. Yeah, that's an understatement. Right there, just to get a view of what we're actually seeing here before I go into a little bit more about this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. This is a couple of tweets by a guy, Alon Lee Green, a Tel Aviv-based activist. Look at this. This is from June 10th.
Jesus
so this has been going on for months. Here's another one. After the gunfire rings out and panic sets in.
اطلق نار على المدنيين الله اكبر ايش حالك لي بس بس بدنا نرجع حقنا نرجع كل اللي بيصير فينا عشان الطحين يا الله عشان كله
Yeah.
Hungry people running amid rubble from gunfire away from aid distribution sites.
Supposed, yeah. I mean, it really is about as evil as it gets. And, the conditions, continue to worsen, just, adding to this portrait for folks. This is in Reuters today as well. No aid supplies left. Staff starves in Gaza. Norwegian Refugee Council says this isn't the only group reporting this. But the Norwegian Refugee Council, one of the largest independent aid organizations in Gaza, told Reuters on Tuesday its supplies were exhausted and some of its staff starving, and the group accused Israel of paralyzing its work. Quote, "Our last tent, our last food parcel, our last relief items have been distributed. There's nothing left," said Jane Egeland, the Secretary General of the Council, told Reuters in an interview. Link from also, I mean, so, they're not only, starving and killing the Palestinians, they're creating conditions that are starving the aid workers that are supposed to be there. I mean, there's just used to be a world where something like this might be considered to be a scandal. But what we see now is the people in the highest positions of power in this country and internationally continue to run cover for what is ongoing there. And it is clearly, at this point, indisputably, a genocide and a purposeful plan to try to murder as many people as possible. And, the other folks, non-Palestinians who are also being killed there, is like, that's also a part of it as well, right? To say, like, look how much impunity we have, that we can do whatever it is what we want. We'll kill Americans, and the American government says, well, I'm not worried about that. We're not worried about those kind of Americans, right? I mean, this is a totalitarian, authoritarian, genocidal state, lashing out in front of the entire world. And instead of treating that state as we should, we're continuing to hear all this nonsense about Israel's right to exist and the sanctity of this state and all this kind of conversation about October 7th. While this is happening right now, it is an insult to your intelligence, your humanity, and your morality.
Yeah, I mean, hearing the Tory mention The Hague was kind of like a little ray of sunshine, because it's like, oh, we're still doing that stuff? Because it doesn't seem like it. It seems like the pretense towards all that stuff, considering like the way Labor's acting, considering the way our own Chuck Schumer has been calling the UN, the same UN that Cindy McCain was representing with the World Food Program, calling that UN anti-Semitic. Mm-hmm. So then what fills the vacuum there for Chuck and Zionists in general? Well, another story here from the Washington Post. The for-profit companies behind U.S.-Israel nonprofit Gaza plan. Again, this is the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Where did this come from? Conceived in late 2023 as part of efforts by Israeli military officials, Israeli business people, and foreign partners to support Israel's war effort. Because you can't trust the UN, right? You just can't trust them. They're too anti-Israel. They're obsessed with all the things that Israel does wrong. They don't. That's what we hear from literally the leader of the supposed opposition party in the Senate, Chuck Schumer. Originally, in 2024, the Gaza Aid Working Group sought advice from Michael Vickers, former Green Beret and CIA veteran, on the board of a company called Orbis Operations. Vickers connected them with another Orbis guy and CIA officer, Philip Riley. Then they incorporated in Wyoming as a limited liability company and registered as a humanitarian nonprofit in Switzerland and Delaware. So this is all above board. Where is it getting funding? McNally Capital, big Chicago-based private equity firm. Yeah, just get some private equity money. They got more than they know what to do with it to shoot some Palestinians that are looking for aid. Safe Reach Solutions, as I mentioned, the primary contractor overseeing the operations. Boston Consulting Group did a little bit of pro bono services on some of the Gaza development stuff that is surely going to happen after all these people are starved to death. This is the same company that had a guy who was supposed to lead it drop out because it wasn't consistent with a guy named Jake Wood the night before it was supposed to begin operations because it was not consistent with humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. That was in May 2024. And yeah, so what you've had since this May is nearing 1,000 people shot by these supposed aid distribution sites. In stories you hear where it sounds like fucking Squid Games. It sounds like, okay, you have and the way that Israelis and apparently our contractors now treat men, they're just terrorists. Mm-hmm. So if you get a chance to take one down, fine. I heard a story of doctors saying, one day we get groupings of people shot in the temple, one day even shot in the genitals, because they are playing it like a game. That's what's happening in Palestine, in Gaza right now. And the taking this out of the UN hands, and not to mention just what we've been talking about with refugee and asylum seekers, rip that shit up. The post-World War II sort of humanitarian order. It's done. It's done. It's being killed right now. And how anyone could think that they're safe with a world that's this menacing and this callous to hell being constructed and maintained with LLCs from fucking Wyoming. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a horror show.
And no, but to think that this beast can never be placated to or fed, right? There's no doubt about it. Do you think Israel has any intention of slowing down their invasion of the West Bank? Right? Do you think that after continuing to murder with impunity all these people in Gaza, that they have any interest in slowing down what they have been doing there? No. Do you think they have any interest in slowing down their plans for Lebanon? Right? I mean, hell, who knows where the edge of this quote unquote greater Israel will be, right? It seems like this might be something that, as long as they think that they can get away with it, they will continue to attack. They will continue to steal. And you have a government in this country, frankly, all across the quote unquote West, that has been all too eager, not just willing, all too eager to placate this monster for my entire life. And even with all of this barbarity and inhumanity put in front of the world, you are seeing, governments continue to defend these kind of activities. Now, the luxury or the hopeful aspect here is that as people see this, human beings say, "Oh, not in my name. This is not something that we support." But you see these attacks. I mean, these attacks on our basic rights like free speech. In this country, we talk about, a lot, the attacks of, people who are employed by universities, right? Or the abduction of somebody like Khalil Mahmoud, right? Sorry, Mahmoud Khalil. And in the United Kingdom right now, I mean, we are watching in the UK something that is almost like a textbook example of an authoritarian government shutting down free speech. where they have basically made it illegal.
Prescribed, like this
It's
is a prescribed ideology to say Palestinian action, and I mean insane.
it's horrific, right? And yeah, and in this country, in the United States, we hear all about like, oh, the dangers of like extremism and all that. And in this country, the leader of the opposition party to Trump's far right, monstrous Republican Party, you have the leader of the opposition party saying things like, yeah, the United Nations is anti-Semitic, or we have this land because I believe my religion has given it to my people, right? That's a religious fanatic. That is 100% a religious fanatic. And what 2 feet does that system of government have to stand on? Really, when you're seeing this horror, and that's why that's why the state, the governments, the powerful have to rely on doing more and more horrible things, both in Gaza, but also all across the United Kingdom and the United States, because it is untenable, right? And there really is no way that they can make an argument to you to say like, hey, what's happening there is not a genocide. They just have to try to shut you up. They have to make it dangerous for you to say those kind of things.
Yeah, sorry. In this thing where the EU countries and Canada and Australia say, we're really upset, guys. I'm sorry, it's not enough. What that is all these leaders understanding that, oh, a historical snapshot is about to be taken. I need to be seen doing something besides handing over bombs, which is, in point and effect, what all these countries are actually doing, right? Like they could just continue to arm this country and continue to support it as it does this. And so, yeah, they want to be seen, with a fucking letter. I'm sorry, you're going to have to sanction Israel. You're going to have to, make it hurt.
Yeah, no, I mean, BDS continues to be, the only serious kind of response to this. Yeah, and there should be no doubt about why that's been made illegal in states like Texas and many states across the country, because they recognize that this is the biggest threat to the occupation of the genocidal state. Matt, before we go over to our other interviews, there is another subject I want to talk to you about a little bit, and that is we talked about it during our Sunday program. Where we were speaking about the vote over Marjorie Taylor Greene's amendment to sort of pull back funding from Israel's Iron Dome. Let me pull up these responses from AOC. We talked about it a little bit, and we kind of, I think, anticipated what the pushback was going to be from figures like AOC, which was that Marjorie Taylor Greene is an odious person, and we don't want to be associated with them. Which at this point, I think, when you look at the insanity and the killing and the genocidal positions of people in Congress hold, right? Singling out one member is truly, can be a little bit silly, right? Because if you say, oh, if I vote with this person, I'm endorsing all of their stuff. Well, then what does it mean when you're, voting with all these other people in Congress who regularly are making these kind of genocidal, fanatical statements? I have these tweets here, but if you want to add anything before we look at them.
Well, I mean, particularly when AOC is doing things like working with Anna Paulina Luna on, I think, and I can't remember what this was, bipartisan bill to cap is something good, to cap credit card interest. Like, I don't need to know about Anna Paulina Luna, right?
Yeah.
And I mean,
that's what I'm getting at. It's like, let me get to her words. So, instead of saying this, so like, this is AOC's first response, and we'll get to the second one in a minute. AOC's first response, this is on July 19th. Marjorie Taylor Greene's amendment does nothing to cut off offensive aid to Israel, nor end the flow of U.S. munitions being used in Gaza. Of course, I voted against it. What it does do is cut off defensive Iron Dome capacities while allowing the actual bombs killing Palestinians to continue. I have long stated that I do not believe that adding to the death count of innocent victims to this war is constructive to its end. That is a simple and clear difference of opinion that has long been established. And this last bit is where it gets kind of interesting here. I remain focused on cutting the flow of U.S. munitions that are being used to perpetuate the genocide in Gaza. Yes. So that was the initial response from AOC there, right? and she uses the reasoning that we had noted before, is that she didn't want to be associated with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Just for simplicity's sake, let me get to the second one so we can talk about these holistically. Okay. Next up, AOC responds a couple days later because people were very upset about that initial tweet. She says, "Google is free. If you're saying I voted for military funding, comma, you are lying. Receipts attached. Drag me for my positions all you want, but lying about them doesn't make you part of the quote left. If you believe neo-Nazis are welcome and operating in good faith, you can have them." Now, that is odd because, again, as we talked about on Sunday, but this is a public show, we'll note, it wasn't just Marjorie Taylor Greene. It was people like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and Summer Lee who voted. And I believe Al Green too, right? Who voted for the Marjorie Taylor Greene amendment. Now, AOC is correct in noting that she votes against this in its entirety, right? And people oftentimes aren't usually being completely accurate. I think there's a part of it that there are a lot of people who comment online who can be kind of ignorant of this or that, but. It is very true that AOC had an opportunity to participate in something with people like Rashida, with people like Ilhan Omar, who she should 100% be standing with, and she didn't. And then to sort of imply that a vote like Ilhan or that Rashida takes is, standing with neo-Nazis, I find to be patently ridiculous.
It's very simple what's happening. She has a different position on the Iron Dome than Ilhan and Rashida Tlaib does. And she tried to say, look at Marjorie Taylor Greene to avoid actually standing on that, which she did halfway. But the truth is, like, Marjorie Taylor Greene is a complete red herring here. Mm-hmm. If Ilhan authored that amendment or Rashida Tlaib, AOC would still be against it. She's pretty consistent on that because of how she feels about Iron Dome funding. And I'll just say Ilhan Omar tweeted out today this. And this is not the first time this sort of subtweeting has happened here. Ilhan says, "The genocide of the people of Gaza continues as members of Congress vote to fund Israel's defensive and offensive military capabilities. This is immoral and no amount of excuses will ever make it okay." Now, this is an actual, split. And I think the truth is that AOC's and her team need to wise up here because people are too smart for this. They're too smart to understand the whole dodge about, well, actually, I voted against the bill. That's good. You could have also supported withdrawing Iron Dome funding. And guess what? You could have said, look at all the previous times I've supported it. But now, given what is going on at this exact precise moment, I'm changing my mind, and look at that. I'm even on the side of Marjorie Taylor Greene. That's how bad this has gotten. She didn't want to do that, and I think it's for political reasons. And if you want to do that, fine. Like maybe it's just how she feels moralistically on this thing, but I think the New York politics could be relevant there. But if you want to avoid taking that vote, then you know what? Stay off Twitter. Don't come at people saying you want it. Don't do this half defense of the Iron Dome and then say, well, actually, it's because of these nasty people.
Okay, well, Matt, I mean, I want to, for clarity's sake, and I think because some people will follow this and some folks won't. Can you explain? Maybe your disagreement with funding something like the Iron Dome, because like the argument that AOC is trying to make and people will make is like, hey, this is a defensive weapon. If this defensive weapon goes away, that just leads to Israeli death. So it just is adding to the death toll, and supporting this kind of thing, is how we keep that. We don't want to support something that is going to lead to more deaths, just as a principle, right? I mean, how do you respond to that kind of argument there?
It's very clear that the Iron Dome has functioned as a genocide impunity device that basically protecting Israel from any retaliation that could stop what it is doing, to check what it is doing, and to continue in the course of an active genocide, to continue to arm that is, I'm sorry, it just is. And you transfer this to any supporting any country doing any atrocity, and it's like, well, I'm just protecting the German civilians. Mm-hmm. Look, firebombing shouldn't have happened, right? But ultimately, what needs to stop is the act of genocide. If they want funds for defensive, munitions, there is a way to do that, and it is called stop actively killing and starving people. And then you can have your impunity machine back. But you don't get any impunity when you start doing this. When you tell successive administrations they have to be, oh, Joe Biden really frustrated with what Israel's doing. Donald Trump really frustrated with what Israel's doing. All of Europe really frustrated with what Israel's doing. Israel's not doing that without support. And I mean, the whole thing of like defensive munitions is kind of weird to me, generally speaking. But again, like there needs, if Israel wants to do this, fine, figure out your own Iron Dome, figure out how to do this on your own, because we cannot be supporting it.
Well, yeah. I mean, and I think it's just important for people to understand, the context of that argument there, because in many ways, this is a kind of significant rift, because AOC is somebody in Congress who has like one of the more pro-Palestinian voting records. She is somebody who, even in that tweet, is using terms like genocide, which I know is a small barrier at this point to talk about, but the fact of the matter is, it is a very rare thing among congressional Democrats to even use the word, genocide. I mean, we even have to have special categories for people who have, like voted present on certain kinds of amendments to say like, oh, they haven't completely condemned that phrasing. Right. In addition to like the very few people like Tilly, people like AOC, people like Ilhan Omar, who will use that kind of terminology. But this thing goes from being a kind of disagreement over whether, supporting the Iron Dome or not supporting the Iron Dome into something larger when you try to kind of, paint the brave position that Ilhan and Rashida and Green and Summer Lee took as somehow being associated with, far-right lunacy, right? You are actually in that moment are attacking the actual moral position and the position of the left at large. And I'd say this is that, like, look, there's also a lot of kind of like baseless attacks against AOC. We talk about them a lot on this kind of programs. Some of them, get cultivated in moments like this when AOC, makes these kind of decisions. There is a section of people who pretty much just make a lot of money by kind of encouraging, kind of a constant state of pessimism, and they'll kind of lie, fudge, or omit things to kind of paint a picture that like AOC is like one of the most Zionist members of Congress, which is just factually untrue, right? And I think that I always try to be very careful on this program and other places to push back against that, because I don't think that it's accurate, for example, that like if AOC was replaced with somebody else, that like, for example, like the United States wouldn't be funding this fucking genocide. We absolutely would. AOC is one of the people that like AIPAC and these organizations want to see lose their seat, because she is somebody who's willing to say these kind of things. It's not far enough. It's not good enough. But if you kind of are living in a fantasy world where you're laying the blame at this person's feet, you're not operating from reality. And I can also even see on a personal level where AOC and some of her staff might be kind of frustrated by the way that they get spoken about or treated online, right? You might say, buck up, and I'd agree with it, but I can understand where maybe that kind of feeling comes from. And you know what I will say to that? I will say this. Maybe y'all should come on to some of these independent media organizations or progressive media organizations and lay out your position. It is ridiculous at this point that we have had figures like AOC who don't regularly come on to these kind of programs. I know you're busy and got a lot to do, and I'm not even saying come on ours, right? Maybe you should go on one that has a bigger reach, but it is wild. And you would have a much better opportunity to make these kind of this kind of case to folks by doing that. Instead of, every once in a while, kind of lashing out on Twitter, which has done very, very little for articulating your position, for strengthening your position, and your standing within these kind of movements. So you come out and speak to folks and make this case clear to people. Because right now it's extremely muddied. And that doesn't serve you, doesn't serve the people of Palestine, it doesn't serve the larger progressive movement.
Yeah, 100%. And, just change your position on Iron Dome. And even if it's just for, I mean, the thing about Iron Dome is it's a giant military industrial apparatus, and it's also a propaganda statement about who's violent, who needs defending, who is the offensive murderous side, and that's all fucked. It's all fucked right now.
Well, we can just flip it around, Matt. Israel can have their Iron Dome if we also build an Iron Dome around Gaza, and we stop allowing Israel to come in and murder those folks. I mean, it's absolutely insane, and the situation is just heartbreaking, and it's really difficult to kind of wrap your head around the just daily horrors and to try to chart a path out of this nightmare.
Yeah, and I mean, just on the AOC side of things, it's just depressing because like I wish that the fighting tirelessly for a ceasefire thing, I wish that never fucking happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I frankly like if she like it's just like things like this like make it seem like, oh, this is a problem that needs addressing, isn't it? Like this is going to continue, and that she kept going back to Twitter and then to Blue Sky about it, like,
and to Instagram. We can go through them.
It's just that's you gotta. I mean, get on the don't even go on a show. Get on the phone to fucking Ilhan Omar and have a debate. I don't know, figure it out.
And this
man.
is something actually, Matt. We won't out any of our sources, but this is something I have heard time and time again. Is that the coordination and communication between all of those kind of offices is not what you would expect. The way that they talk about them, I'm sure everybody on like a personal level likes each other. You know what I mean, in a general sense. And people have disagreements, and sometimes when in the moment it can get heated. But the fact that there is no kind of real serious coordination like you would want from the very very small cadre of people who associate themselves with more progressive to democratic socialist politics, is a huge loss for the movement. I mean, what are we supposed to say that this kind of politics represents when the people who are associated with it are taking, widely different positions on something as significant and important as, this, against funding Israel's Iron Dome, right? These are massive.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, we can talk about this forever, and we'll probably talk about it more in the post game. But we had a lot of show for y'all, so we're going to jump over to our conversation with Alexander Sammon, where we are talking about the Roosevelt Hotel, which gave Matt a wonderful, wonderful few memories back when he was a younger man. And
honestly, the Roosevelt Hotel, when I was in it, it looked like a place that like Don Draper would have like affairs and feel disgusted with himself afterwards. Like it was not in great shape in about 2013. But.
Well, we'll be talking about that hotel and specifically migration in this country. It was a very interesting conversation. And then we'll be right back with some more updates, including a look at the radical roots of American populism. You're not going to miss it. But let's get to our guest first here.
Welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me, as always, David Griscom. Hello, David.
Hey, friend.
And joining us today is Alexander Sammon, features writer at Slate.com, talking about a new feature piece that he's got in there. The haunted final days of the Roosevelt Hotel. It became a flashpoint for right-wing conspiracies about immigration. On the day it closed, the scene was telling. Alexander, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, guys. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I found this piece really interesting, particularly the sort of evocation of Ellis Island. But before we get into that, what was the Roosevelt Hotel?
Yeah, the Roosevelt Hotel is it's sort of like a faded glory hotel, Midtown Manhattan on the east side, close to Grand Central. And it was a place I think that was sort of storied, I think it opened in the 1920s, and if you're really into like New York City lore, it's a place you might know a little bit about. In the 1940s, it was the headquarters for which candidate? The 1948 presidential election. It was was it Dewey or
Dewey.
something?
That was the Dewey defeats Truman. Yeah.
Yes. Right. Okay. So yeah, exactly. So it's a place, it's got some New York City lore. It is not a place I think you would say is one of the great luxury environments of Midtown Manhattan, and has not been for many decades. But it has some reputation, some standing. And yeah, I think it, in the last, God, you'd have to say last handful of years, maybe last decades, it's sort of like been on the downward spiral a little bit. And it was, struggled through COVID. It sort of had this recent history is much less glamorous. And then was opened as a migrant shelter in 2022, and found this new identity as like a fixture of right-wing media, the site of all sorts of complaints and lurid fantasies about immigration. And I think if you're a consumer of like liberal media or left-wing media, like maybe you didn't know anything about it at all. And to me, that was really interesting, because it's like, it's either the place everything about, or nothing about. And the truth obviously is somewhere else, I think. But an interesting place, certainly in New York City history and of New York City present as well.
Well, let's just ask, for those who weren't maybe watching and plugged into right-wing media, I mean, what were these terrible things that, the right was claiming was happening around there?
Yeah, so it's like, I mean, it depends who you ask, but like definitely Tren de Aragua headquarters was a common claim about this place. It was, I mean, it's funny because it was both the arrival center and a long-term. I mean, it was a shelter. So you had people living there in 85% of the rooms, and then they had 15% of the rooms were short-term stays and check-ins and stuff for recent arrivals. But like, it was all families living there. So it was like a lot of children, a lot of families with like serious health challenges, or families who had at least one member facing serious health issues. So it actually was like mostly women and children, more or less. But the way that showed up in like the New York Post coverage of the place is that like, this is the epicenter of Tren de Aragua in the United States, which is obviously the most violent and pernicious criminal gang in the country. And the fact that it's mostly women and children who live here means that actually like all the gangbangers they use this phrase like pint-sized gangbanger that really stuck with me, about like 12-year-olds who were the shock troops of Tren de Aragua. And it sort of, spiraled out from there. There were other ways that this, other sort of like villainous immigrant groups that were sort of caricatured out of this place. But I think that was the thing you heard the most, because a lot of these immigrants were Latin American, but, also Chinese nationals, Russian nationals, could have been anything on either of those fronts. Like the coverage was sprawling. And I think once it got into alternative right-wing media with the YouTube and the TikTok stuff, and it was like, well, everyone gets a bite at this apple. And you saw some pretty fantastic descriptions.
That stuff is really depressing. I will say I have stayed at the Hotel Roosevelt a decade plus ago. I was newly accepted into NYU and needed to come out here apartment hunting. And the Roosevelt was the one hotel in Manhattan. I'm pretty sure it was the only one that a room could be had for under $200 a night at that point, like 2012. And I'll tell you, it felt like we were the only people in that building at that point. So it's not surprising to me that it would later sort of have difficult money troubles. But so basically COVID comes, right? And this gets turned into, kind of like, the positive vision, which is not ready to be picked up by either party at this point, of how we process immigrants and say honor asylum claims. Can you just talk about like how this started serving as basically a 21st century Ellis Island?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, right, it's really good to point that out, that like part of the right-wing story about this was like, it's a bunch of organized crime and illegal immigration and all this other stuff. But also it's like everyone's living in luxury on the taxpayer dime, right? That was the other valence of this, is that like, this is a luxury hotel and this is like as nice as it gets. And like, you are paying for this. And of course, like that hasn't been accurate since like the 40s, right? Like in the piece, I make this point that like, they don't even have a central HVAC system in this hotel. Like, it's not like, it's not like the modern appurtenances of American living aren't even, there. It's like, but yeah, so in COVID, obviously already pretty beleaguered hotel with not a lot of attendance. It shuts down, and it's just pretty much, it's idle, basically fallow for a couple of years. And then once the migrant surge or this wave of immigration, which is obviously stoked greatly by Greg Abbott and the governor of Texas, which I'm sure we'll talk much about, but it's one of these buildings that's got nothing going on and it's empty. And so the city strikes a deal, which is a pretty generous deal. And this is one of those things that comes up also in the story, is that the city is looking for shelter space. They strike this deal with the Roosevelt 3-year deal, and they're paying $202 a night per room, which is for a hotel that was defunct for, at that point, years and had no guests. It's not, they didn't get a bargain on that exactly. They were paying full freight. But yeah, that was the first place that they opened up that was really, I think, sort of at the center of this whole infrastructure that gets built to deal with this surge in migration and these new arrivals in New York City. So the Roosevelt is a very important part of this ecosystem that gets built out pretty quickly. And yeah, that was at least the finances of that deal that got struck in 22.
Let's talk about the Texas Greg Abbott element of this here. I'm curious, how you would describe that for folks looking back. And it's something we've covered here before, but just enter that.
Yeah, well, I think that this is arguably one of the most successful acts of political theater, political opportunism that we've seen in American politics in a long time, and the ability to raise the salience of immigration as a concern for American voters, just a huge success. I think if you're looking at it purely from a political brinkmanship sort of perspective, and it's just stunningly cruel thing to do, something you have to do with such blithe disregard for the well-being of the most vulnerable people on the planet. And I think, I covered this from a politics standpoint before, and I was this is an act of opportunism in theater and stuff. And not until I really spent time at the Roosevelt was I oh my God, what this actually looks like. It was it's hard to countenance some of it. It's the stories I would hear routinely were people would arrive at the border, they would cross the border, Border Patrol or ICE would seize their medication. So, they would bring all their belongings, right? The stuff that they need to survive, it gets seized immediately. If they make it across the border, they get into Texas. They're told at that point by immigration authority or by someone who works for Abbott's office, you can either sleep on the sidewalk or you can get on a bus. 2 options. And so most people are all right, I guess I'll get on the bus. And they get on the bus. They don't tell them where they're going. And so they load the bus. Oftentimes people were getting put on these buses who were actively sick. So there were people with active cases of chickenpox, active cases of measles. They put those people on buses with healthy people, with pregnant women. So many stories about women showing up in New York City 9 months pregnant, never having seen a doctor. And they ramped up this effort over the course of I think it really started in summer of 23 and stepped up and up and up. These buses, they refused to tell the city of New York when the buses were arriving, despite protracted efforts from the civic service over here to just to schedule arrivals. And so, I could go on and on about this, but the shorter version of this is that people are arriving in New York City 24 hours a day, utterly confused. They have no idea where they are. Some of them have no interest in being in New York City. Some of them have immigration appointments, court dates and stuff in Texas 2 weeks later. And the city basically has to absorb that nonstop for 2 years. And that's more or less the sort of situation that became commonplace.
I'll just note a whole mockery on the idea that this should be left up to the states, because if the states are just going to foist it onto other states as an issue, clearly the federal government needs to be the responsible actor in this. And disgusting to use people like that. Eric Adams, what was his role in all this?
Yeah, so right. It's this is one of those things you start the parade of opportunists and cynics it's a mile long, right? So Adams, of course, staring down his own sort of political vulnerability and deep unpopularity in New York City, decides that he should take a page out of this playbook and vilify immigrants as a way to sort of burnish his own numbers. And so he, is like, these immigrants are going to destroy New York City. It's a famous quote about immigrants. And he goes to great lengths to try to keep these immigrants from showing up. When that fails, because New York City has laws, they have this right to shelter law. They have, these are important civic protections that have, that I think New York City proudly has passed into law and should be, it should be proud. It's like the fact that no child will ever sleep on the street. These are commitments that the city has made. Anyways, Adams, of course, is like, I don't back any of that. And I see some political opportunity. So he basically was at odds with this operation the entire time and spent a bunch of time trying to keep immigrants from showing up to New York City, to keep the stuff from progressing. When he decided that the shelter law, the right to shelter thing was inconvenient, he tried to overturn that rule. And basically was like, we're not going to let people stay in shelters longer than 30 days. And of course that triggered a lawsuit. And he did manage to, strike a deal that shortened the tenure of stays. People were able to apply for longer stays, but they were kicked out of the shelter system. Especially single men were kicked out of the shelter system within 30 days. Families were kicked out after 60 days. Those are big changes to the way this stuff was run. And then, of course, when it came time to strike a deal with Trump over getting his corruption charges thrown out, that's where Adams made the deal, was with conspiring with ICE, was allowing the Trump administration to enforce its immigration agenda in New York City. And so right when that deal is announced, Adams sells out this entire apparatus and is like, all right, ICE is welcome in New York City. We're going to allow them to do these raids, and we're going to shut down all these facilities as fast as we can. And so in late February, he announces the Roosevelt's going to be shut down. And of course, right at that same time, he gets this pardon from Trump. And then, of course, ICE is all over New York City, and we have the sort of climate that we see still today. So, Adams basically sold out this operation at every turn, and did save his own skin politically in the sense of it got him off of the DOJ case. Did it save his reelection campaign? I don't think so, but he's not going to jail, so that's something.
It's absolutely insane.
So, Alex, what is the status of the Roosevelt right now?
Yeah, so at the end of June, they effectively vacated the hotel. So Adams, said by June it's got to be empty. And they did go through the process of moving everyone out of the facility. The intake center got shut down. So I mean, the numbers on this stuff are sort of astonishing. But this is where the little Ellis Island thing comes in. Is it? So during the sort of migrant crisis, or this wave of migration to New York City, or to the country in general, I think they said that just shy of 240,000 people came to New York City over the course of 3 years, seeking asylum, more or less. Legally protected. It's a mode of legal immigration, right? Since that facility was set up at the Roosevelt processed 155,000 people, I think, in 2 years, which is just an astounding undertaking. The amount of administrative capacity you have to do that is it's really something. And we can get into that more or less if we want to, but really, really large number of people came through the Roosevelt, and they moved on to other facilities. They left New York, or they went back to Texas, or they met up with family members, or they, all sorts of outcomes. Not all of them stayed there, obviously, but by the end of June, all the people who were staying there had been moved out. Some of them went to other facilities in the Bronx, or there's another hotel called the Row that is still active. So the city, Adams has not been able to shut down everything, but this particular site, which was so iconic, is empty. And I was there, I think it was July 2nd was the last day. So Adams came for a quick presser, which is a victory lap. And so I was in there for that. And at that point, everyone was gone. There was very scant evidence of what had happened there at all. And the sort of spectacular footnote on all of this is, of course, despite Adams' political motivations for getting the place shut down, and the Trump administration's motivations for trying to make an example of it, the real reason it shut down was because of the terms of an IMF loan, which is gets really into another funny dynamic in this whole thing, which is that, of course, the shadowy world of international finance has something to say about this story as well.
Well, the economic issue is kind of interesting to me, just in terms of, like you said, $202 a room per night. That seems like, probably less than you could get at any other hotel in Manhattan. But that is kind of where it was in the market. It was, like you said, the downscale hotel. So once that, gets easy business, then that might lead to inflation in hotel rooms elsewhere. But I'm curious, like, in terms of the policy and what should be done, because, like you say, seeking asylum is something that we have honored, and we started honoring after the Holocaust, right? For, I would say, good reason. And also, we can't overlook that it isn't the Nazis who say destroyed Venezuela's oil industry. It was the United States of America. So, like, I am not somebody who thinks, well, obviously anybody listening to this is not someone who thinks, well, we should stop asylum seekers. So is there a model here that I think could be maybe affirmed by Democrats, maybe nationally, to set up actually immigrant processing centers and asylum seeker processes? Like, what's the policy prescription here?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that really struck me in reporting this piece. Is I was like, this is something that someone should champion. I mean, this is like to me, it's like a colossal triumph of like public service and administration, and a huge Herculean effort, but also by individual health and service workers. But I think like a huge success on behalf of the public sector, which is obviously endlessly sort of maligned. And I mean, I think there are like smaller bore things that you could say, like some of the processes that they designed at the Roosevelt should be in place at the border. I mean, and this is not a romantic suggestion even, but like when people are coming across the border, if they're doing it, if they're seeking asylum, if they're doing legally protected immigration as it exists or existed. I mean, I don't know what's going on right now, but like just simple things about like health screenings and vaccines and like stuff like that. Like that's not part of the process at all, obviously, because now that the regime is about like inflicting maximum discomfort and suffering. But like the way they did it at the Roosevelt, they were like, and I talked to the people who designed it, they were like, you could implement this at every border crossing. It'd be very easy to do. The public health benefits are gigantic. Like, and I think that, yeah, if you look at like, I mean, the way people arrived in Midtown in New York City was obviously like, very unfortunate, painful and unnecessarily so. But when they got to New York, it was like actually the intake system was very impressive, and they like checked people in. They ran people through like a gamut of health screenings, checked for all sorts of infectious diseases. Then they went through a series of vaccine screenings, so they got people vaccinated for simple infectious disease, and then they went through depression screening, which is this is a flourish of New York City specifically, but like the public health sector in New York City mandates that there's a mental health element to this, so people got mental health services. Obviously, people who have walked from Venezuela oftentimes have seen some pretty horrifying stuff along the road, and then they got people work permits, like that was being done within the hour. So you had this whole gauntlet of social services that were being rendered, and then they found people housing, right? And it's like some people stayed for one night. Like oftentimes it wasn't like you were putting them up in public housing and they were made forever and they're on Medicaid, and it's like there is sort of that right-wing story about like welfare queens or whatever. But I think honestly, like you had a really compelling story here about like how this city, even with no heads up, even in an era where it's hard to find money to provision these sorts of things, like where Medicare for all seems very far away and public housing is so fraught and difficult to develop and stuff. It's like, well, they did the whole thing right there and they figured it all out, and it was like pretty smooth running. I mean, people worked really hard, but yeah, and there was just no one to champion that vision because Democrats were afraid of immigration as an issue, and Eric Adams was selling it out for his own political career, and no one said like, hey, this is actually an amazing thing that's happening here.
I mean, that's just what I was going to kind of ask, because it was so effective, I think, on the right and these kind of stories, both for like some of the reasons that, we've been talking about, like off mic, is that like, there is this kind of like sense of injustice that the right likes to bring up when it comes to like specifically the hotel example, because most people in America like do recognize that like, fuck, if I get like evicted from my house, I'm probably, on the street, and there, most people don't feel like there might be a hotel waiting for them, provided by the government. So like there was a Republican side of it that was like really trying to point on the unfairness. But really, I mean, it is kind of shocking just how effective it was, even with, I don't know, like Democratic voters, right? We saw this kind of big shift on the immigration question. And yeah, I mean, so really, in your mind, there just was a kind of cowardice amongst the Democratic Party in New York for being able to say like, hey, look, they threw us a curveball and we did really, really well with this issue. They just kind of ran away from it.
Totally. Yeah. And yeah, in a way where it's just like, I think that this story, there's all these opportunists, right? I think I said this already, but like down to like the hotels themselves, right? Who like the 2-star Holiday Inns are getting $300 a night to put migrants up. Like everyone had a chance, saw that they had a chance to benefit from this in this cynical way by either taking advantage of or beating up on these migrants who are like the most vulnerable and poorest people in the world. I mean, it's like talking about a sense of injustice. It's like, you hear enough of these stories, it just like fills you with rage where you're like, okay, well, these people can't vote. So everyone's like, I'm going to score points off of them. Or I'm going to make money off of this, or I'm going to whatever. And there was no one there to champion that. And it's crazy because, right, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, is that like that sentiment, the American sentiment towards immigration is not something that's like totally calcified. It's not like, oh, every American knows that like, we hate when Venezuelans get a free night at a hotel. It's like people have seen Trump's immigration policy for like 3 months. Now they're back to trusting Democrats more than Republicans on immigration, which was unthinkable a year ago. So this stuff is totally malleable. And if you have anyone to advocate for it in a positive way, like there obviously was tons of political upside for someone to say like, hey, this is actually awesome. And like, this is a cool thing that we're doing. And we should have more of it. And instead it was like, don't talk about it. Please, love of God, don't talk about it. And I think even like, I mean, plenty of blame to go around. I think even like liberal, like nonprofit news groups in New York City were sort of like, there were some immigrants who did beat up those cops or whatever. Like it says people are sleeping on the street and it doesn't look that good. And it's like, I don't know. I just feel like it was a huge, huge whiff.
Over 4th of July, I got to talking with some Trump supporting relatives, and even they still have we're Ellis Island immigrants mythology ready to tap into, and they're under the impression that Trump's only trying to get out, the baddies who beat up cops, and that Obama wants to live here. But that it's so depressing, this story, because it does make me think of like, oh, if we had Ellis Island now, it would just be demonized by the right, and the center would be embarrassed by it.
Right, totally. I mean, I like it's like it's sort of a cute framing device to be like, little Ellis Island, and that's what the residents apparently there would call it. But it's like that's exactly what it would have been like, right? It's like this is in New York City, and something that like I think we sort of, one of these very exceedingly rare sort of common shared American values at this point is like Ellis Island was a cool thing. Like people love talking about tracing their family back to Ellis Island and this immigration wave. And it was like a positive, I think it's like largely seen as a positive thing. It's like, well, this is the immediate proxy of that. This is like the immediate avatar of that in the 21st century. And like, look how it's received. I mean, there's not a single, it's hard to find someone who would say like, I know about the Roosevelt Hotel. It's awesome. And like, yeah, that was a cool thing that we did. A cool, like, American thing we did.
For my part, honestly, yeah, like, I mean, we were talking about this, a lot, but I had no idea the scale to which operations had scaled up at this hotel, even as someone who lives here. And I do think that is a political messaging failure. And again, there's no such thing as halfway crooks. Like you can't do something and then hope you get rewarded for it, even though you're not willing to sell it to people. Like it's just you're actually afraid to sell it to people. That's not politics. That's that's something else. But Alex Sammon, people can follow you. Where should people follow you at, actually?
Yeah, I mean, you can read me at Slate. Slate's where all my work is published these days. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. If that's not enough, you can find my other musings over there. But yeah, that's yeah, I'm around. But Slate's going to be where the stuff that's worthy of being published is being published, and the stuff that's less worthy you can find on my social media. So yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Well, there you go. Well, we'll have the link to this piece in the show notes. Thanks so much, Alex. Yeah, great talking to Alex there. A great journalist that I like reading.
Yeah, no, it's always wonderful having him on the program. Talk about that, and it's like I don't know, it's worth kind of understanding what the other side is saying about these things, and also how the lack of political imagination is truly limiting in this country.
That's a really good point, because I'm caught up in how much I did not know any of this was going on. I didn't know, I'm aware of people who like treat undocumented folks in hospitals or whatever, just because I know nurses. I never knew anything about the Roosevelt Hotel and that whole situation. I never knew that it had been turned into an asylum shelter at all, or if it crossed my consciousness, it didn't make an impression. And I certainly didn't know the right wing had a whole sort of mythology or hysteria campaign around it. And that is this kind of scary thing to me where our media is at right now. Because when the Ground Zero Mosque stuff was going on in 2009 or so, you couldn't hear about it. You couldn't hear about anything else. I was in Minnesota, and it was like the only thing people were talking about. And now these things are like the streams are so, the channels are
people
so,
are living all like completely different realities. No, I mean,
really?
no, 100%. And I mean, it's a huge part of of Trump world, right? Particularly when it comes to migration, is painting this kind of emergency picture where, armed gangs are breaking into the country and shooting people up, killing folks, and then also like sleeping in 5-star luxury hotels paid for by Biden. You do have to understand that like there is just such a sea of that kind of misinformation out there that to help you understand a little bit of why folks are so crazy, and like it's worthwhile pushing back against it. On that, I mean, Matt, I gotta ask you about something that I know you've been very excited about, but we've been seeing a lot of news about this fella. Go ahead, Matt.
I have been, but first I found a picture that I posted on my Instagram of when I was at the hotel. So let me pull this up in a way that doesn't give away any like personal information. Yeah, I think I'm safe. So this is from my Instagram, and this is from 2012. Didn't have a whole lot of followers. This got five total likes, but this is a picture I took of the hallway.
Man, this is very
in my lame ass description, nondescript, but it was dingy, man.
Yeah, it seems like it.
But yeah.
No,
Anyway, yes.
It just looks like a scene from The Shining.
Exactly. That's what it felt like. It was a very strange vibe in there.
Just talking about like different worlds and different sets of information. I want you to give us some context on this, because I'm over here on Twitter. I'm down here in Texas, and I'm seeing about all this really dangerous stuff that's happening up in Minnesota. And this is one of these guys who, by the way, Matt and I were trying to find the provenance of this tweet or whatever. It's gone through like 4 or 5 of these right-wing accounts that are trying to fearmonger about it. So these are all just pathetic, nasty guys who are trying to get some bucks from Daddy Elon. But this figure who we'll pick on because he has 300,000 plus followers. Minneapolis, good luck. This is about to be your new mayor. And I'm sure we're about to hear some really shocking stuff from this fella here.
Hello everyone, Senator Omar Fateh here, candidate for mayor of Minneapolis. We are here at the Target Center today for the DFL endorsement for the Board of Estimate and Taxation, park boards, as well as the mayoral race. Really excited. We're talking to a lot of great delegates today about why we're running. Excited to talk about our vision for a city that actually provides meaningful public safety for everybody, no longer polluting our underrepresented communities, making sure everyone has access to clean air and clean water, fully supporting our public schools, and making sure everyone has a safe and stable housing. I'm really honored to be here today, and I'm hoping to earn your trust and your support. And myself, hopefully becoming a first-time father in a few weeks, I want to have a city that I can raise my son in, and that all of us can raise our families in. So hope to earn your support, and thank you all so much.
Well, sounds pretty nice to me, man. I mean, what's going on in Minneapolis?
Yeah, so that's Omar Fateh. Omar is the fucking man. We have him in this image here, I think, which kind of gives a good backstory into who he is. This is from the Minnesota Reformer from 2023, and we actually had Izzy Bear Breen on to talk about this. But this is when...
The worst internet connection of all time.
Oh, did I
Go
lose
ahead,
my
sorry.
connection?
No, his connection. Please go ahead. I'm sorry.
Shit. Well, anyway, I'll try to power through here. But here,
No, your internet connection is fine. I was saying that interview, his connection was very bad, and now I've completely derailed this segment. So please go back on the thing.
Okay. So, Minnesota legislature approves minimum wage for Uber and Lyft drivers, and this is Omar being foisted on the shoulders of literal Uber drivers, and it's the sort of thing. Like, this is the sort of image that we'd like to see our politics get buy-in from representing folks like this. And the truth is, he's getting drawing a lot of comparisons to Zoran, in part because he's not a white guy, and that's going to scare a lot of people. But also because of he's a DSA member. In fact, there's a image or a screenshot that I was looking for on Twitter where he says join DSA back in like 2003, and Zoran also did. And now DSA is like, join DSA. You never know if you're going to be next to the next mayor of a city. But he's focused on the same things, affordability, and especially with regards to housing. So, he's great, and he just won the Minnesota DFL, which I believe Democrat Farm Labor, endorsement over an incumbent, which I saw somebody you could fact check this, but say that hasn't happened in a century, a century, not this century, but a century, where you have an incumbent, maybe it meant this century, now that I say that, but either way, you have an incumbent mayor, Jacob Fry, and the own party doesn't exactly. His own party
didn't endorse him, and they pulled the plug on Mr. Elect there. I mean, it's I'm joking. My ignorance about this campaign has been very exciting to watch. Please continue, Matt.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So his own party. So he actually. I was kind of, I wasn't that tapped in. I'm a ride or die for Fateh, but this convention came up where he's going for this endorsement of the actual Democratic Party. The DFL is what's called in Minnesota, and basically he wins the first round, something like 44 to 35% of the first votes, which is done in the Target Center where the Timberwolves play. And which is already shocking. You need 60% to get the endorsement outright. Okay, so he didn't break that barrier, but 44, you beat the incumbent 44 to 35%. Some great work has been done for him there, and also there's other members of this primary. Fry got 35%. Omar got 44%. Now, the Fry campaign at some point sent out a tweet that says, "It's clear this convention is over and not representative." In what sort of analysts are describing, and there's this piece here from Joey Peters. that they're saying that they think that Fry was trying to remove quorum, right? So withdraw all of his people, and they can't do any more business that night. Instead, what happened is they held another vote after Fry's people left, and Omar won handily. So handily they didn't even need to tabulate the rest of the vote.
Wow.
And now our boy Jacob Fry is...
So he tried to cheat, and now he's claiming that the game was rigged against him, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now he's going stop the steal mode. Maybe he can get Mike Pillow involved because he's in the area. And it's so fascinating because, was talking to a caller earlier today about Minnesota and the difference between Cuomo, because I thought Fry would be tougher to unseat because he didn't have the liabilities. Cuomo's literally suing women for gynecological records. Like, in addition to being just a reactionary to the point where immediately after he leaves office, all of a sudden marijuana is legal. Like, there's some pretty clear signals. Where Fry is just, we hate him because he's a neo-lib, sort of milquetoast. He's an Obama-style politician. He's basically talked a decent game during, like, say, the George Floyd protests or Philando Castile about that, maybe before then. But ultimately, he sides with the cops, including this, I believe there's a no-knock warrant thing that he's got that, you hear all this stuff about how the reaction against the 2020 police protests. But actually in Minnesota, people are still kind of upset about cops being able to just gun people down. And so Fry hasn't won any support that way, but he also lacks what Cuomo has, in that Cuomo will put the screws to you, and he has a reputation and frankly family backing to like make that threat seem palpable. Fry's a pipsqueak. So he didn't have, and Fateh's been getting other union endorsements in the run up to this, which, is earlier signal that this was happening. And it's fascinating to me, this moment we're in, to look at it optimistically for a second, that Fry is exactly, like we had GP Jacob on, he's exactly what the sort of party elite want from their politicians. But no one's going to look at him as a model of how to rise in power themselves, any people who want to be politicians, because he just got smoked. Nobody wants him anymore. He's not making any sort of like reactionary wing happy enough to throw down for him. And the actual people that show up to conventions and aren't just trying to dip and, I don't know, get a martini, they're going to show up for him, and they got him this endorsement. I think it's really fascinating that Fry has basically been proven this week that you can't even get your party's endorsement as an incumbent mayor. And not only do you lose it, but a DSA candidate gets it instead.
Well, I mean, it goes to show, Philip Rocco had a really good piece in Catalyst about the Democratic Party and something along the lines of like why the Democratic Party is so useless. But like, the argument about it is not just kind of like typical, I don't know, ultra left whining. It's like actually looking at like what's happened within the Democratic Party. And one of the things about the Democratic Party and its politics, particularly how it relates to its base, is it's become very, very weak and hollow in terms of its ability to actually mobilize. And I mean that in like an actual like strategic way. Its own membership, because so much of the work that used to like would happen in a party organization, of like, political education, of being able to get people out to go and knock on doors and all this kind of stuff, has been outsourced to NGOs, to a certain extent campaigns, if they can build that apparatus. And NGOs tend to like have more like consumer members, right? Or people who aren't necessarily like engaged in a way that like DSA members are, right? If you're a DSA member, yeah, you can be what quote unquote what they call a paper member, where you just kind of pay your dues and you support them maybe online. But you know what? Actually, a lot of DSA members like go to meetings regularly, and like they participate in reading groups and in volunteer opportunities, and certainly in canvassing operations. And that actually gives an organization like the DSA, when it's well organized, a tremendous advantage over even the money and the influence and the name recognition that somebody like Fry might have, because Fry doesn't got people. Fry doesn't have folks who are gonna go out and like knock on doors for him with the same passion and vigor as Omar's people will.
Exactly, and it's so stark that that type of liberalism has no juice. And it's no surprise it lost to Trump twice, frankly.
Yeah.
And we'll go back to Trump not being a strong candidate. Here is this 2021 Omar retweeting Aiden for Progress, great Minneapolis-based DSA, or saying join DSA, Omar saying join DSA, and Zoran with the shouting face emoji. So just nice little story, and nice to see this convention, after the whole Buttigieg or Buttigieg, Iowa thing, the different type of shenanigans that went on there, to actually like get the best of one of these little twerps and have them be the ones crying on the outside, and frankly in an undemocratic way. Like if a socialist did exactly what Fry did, said, hey, actually, we're going to pull out and try to remove the quorum from this. And
Anti-democracy organization. Yeah.
I'd be like, bro, like, I support us, even taking like a few power grabs here or there. This is a little bit blatant, don't you think?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's great. I mean, Cuomo again, too, running again, just like that fellow did against India Walton in Buffalo. I mean, the Democrats have shown themselves time and time again that they are very, very willing to throw away the results of a democratic election if it doesn't go their way, which I don't think is a good thing.
Tip of 40 to the curb for vote blue no matter who. I think if you're going to invoke it as if it is dead and buried, because that shit is just clearly is just a power statement. And this is about suck it up, as what... not David Brooks. I can't remember the guy. Says, "Suck on this." That's what we needed to tell Iraq during the war. That's all that ever was.
Yeah. Well, folks, in a minute we're going to go over the postgame. Patreon.com/leftreckoning to get access to it. Reminder: we got the whole thing going for patrons already with no ads, and it's transitioned smoothly in the postgame. So if you're a patron, go over to Patreon.com/leftreckoning. Jump onto that stream. After this next segment, y'all, the lights are going to go out, but Matt and I will still be chatting, hanging out, and we'll be doing then the post game. So go there, support the work. You also get those Sunday shows as well. But we got one more thing before we go over, right, Matt?
Yeah, let's talk about David's piece here, and let me pull it up, actually, unless you have it ready, but we should...
Yeah, I can get it. It's in Jacobin, and it's called Populism Was Born from a Rural
I got
and
it too.
Urban Alliance.
You got it. Okay, cool. Yep. So let's start with the rural side of this, David. What sort of, and first of all, we're in the 1880s.
Roughly, yeah.
And very interesting time. We've covered on a little bit here with the, and especially the 1870s too, with the St. Louis strike. But what's going on agriculturally with the farmers on this side of the alliance?
Totally. And just to establish that this is the birth of American populism, right? Populism is one of those terms that we're always talking about American politics today. On the left, we say we need to return to an economic populism. Centrists use it as a kind of slur for meaning of politics wherever it just seems like, I don't know, it's popular, it's got a lot of folks in it, maybe uses a kind of us versus us language. But this is the actual existing populist movement. So when you say things like, hey, we want to revive it, we want to, build off of it, it's worth doing the history. So we did that here at Jacobin as a kind of preview for some of the things that would be in my book on Texas politics. But this is an interesting story that is kind of like the precursor, let's call it, to the American populist movement. And yes, populism was born from this rural and urban alliance, and that we should have again today. What's the rural side? So farmers in the South, and in Texas in particular, were being crushed under this debt system. And the South was decimated after the Civil War, and people were continuing to grow cotton all across the region, and especially in Texas, right? So cotton is still king. Now, for most people, the people who were growing this kind of cotton, they tended to be poor farmers, be they black or white. And they tended to be people who didn't have a lot of cash, right? And that's still kind of traditional when you think about like the way that the agricultural cycle works. Like you need to borrow money at the beginning of the cycle to buy the crops, buy all the stuff, and then you get paid at the end of the session, and you pay it back. Well, in Texas and all across the South, there's a system called the crop lien system. And what that meant was the merchant class would loan out would basically sell goods to these people on credit. So, you need seed, you need tools, hell, you need food, you need shoes for your children, you need a dress for your wife. You're going to be buying that on credit from these merchants. And these merchants knew that they had, these people over barrel. Are we still here?
Yep, you're good. You all right? Can you hear me? Oh, let's, I'm going to text David. It was fine.
I don't know why that happened. We can't use the system anymore, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, you just stopped being able to hear me, or what happened?
Yeah, it said we had lost connection. But anyways, I'm sorry. So where was I? I was talking about
You're talking the crop lean system, yeah.
And so they're selling to merchants like 200% markups on these kind of things. And again, these are farmers who don't really have access to any capital. They don't have cash on hand. So they're going into debt at the beginning of the season, and then because of the financial monetary system in the country, they're getting screwed on the other side, right? It's basically the short version of it, right? The merchants are putting these people in debt. And then there is basically a crisis of profitability in cotton. So all of these farmers aren't able to meet their debts. And year after year after year, they would find themselves deeper and deeper and deeper into debt, despite the fact that they were working fucking harder than anybody in that kind of system. And it got so bad that many farmers, would lose their farms to the merchants, but they would continue living and working them, right? So it was, especially later in the 1900s, there were Texans whose family might have owned the ground that they were working, despite the fact that those families, those people who were working then, were renters. So this is creating this whole kind of crisis amongst the farmers, and they start asking themselves this question that I really love from a fellow named S.O. Dawes, who was one of the first intellectuals of what is called the Farmers Alliance. Who asked, why is it that those who work most get least and those who work least get most? And that sounds like a pretty good socialist question to me, by the way, friends, right? Is it that the people who are working are on the bottom of the society and the people who live in leisure and do absolutely nothing of value for society living the best lives? So all these farmers start getting themselves together into these, organizations called the Farmers Alliance, which began asking this kind of fundamental question. Why is it that the system is set up to keep us working and we're producing a lot, right? It wasn't like they weren't producing. They're producing, tremendous amounts of cotton and other cash crops, but they're continuing to find themselves in debt, despite all of this storytelling that we're getting from what we would call the media today, right? From the newspapers, from popular culture at the time, of all you need to do in America is just work really, really hard and you'll get to the top, right? Everyone really believed in this kind of idea even then. But people found themselves, not only was their life not getting better, many of them were getting that kind of moment where oh shit, I'm going to have a more difficult life than my parents. So they started organizing themselves into organizations called the Farmers, that they called the Farmers Alliance. That was the kind of precursor farmer left-wing organization at the time.
And this is the exact same sort of thing that happens 40 years later up north in North Dakota. And this is where you see somebody from a farmer. So it's they got a whole bunch of land. Well, the land is only calculated so much to the point where, it's not actually going to be productive enough for them to sustain themselves. So ultimately, they're going to be selling that to the bank, or the bank's going to be reclaiming it, or bought up by some other conglomerate. It just happens repetitively, and then you see the proletization of farmers. And they, grapes of wrath type thing too.
Totally. And I would just also add really quick too, that I think in American history, a lot of people get confused about this. Karl Kautsky, in fact, a very famous Marxist, kind of wrote about the farmers as being an interesting class who might stand with us, but they are by nature petty bourgeois. And he didn't really understand the system of production, at least in the South, right? Now, in the Midwest and in the Northeast, the farming classes were fairly different than they were in the South, and that's why, despite most people don't know this history, this is why these kind of Southern farmers were amongst the most politically radical of agrarian workers, and it was because of the particular system of production in the South, which is what we were just talking about, was this tenant farming system where people what they were doing wasn't so much like owning an asset and getting money from it. They were working property that was owned by somebody else, or they were very, very close to that system. If they weren't already living in a system where they were tenant farmers, most of them weren't that far away from it, right? So it created a very different kind of political consciousness with this farmer. And a lot of Marxists didn't understand what was going on with Southern farming, which led to a lot of confusion later.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So let's move now to the rail folks. Who were the Knights of Labor?
Knights of Labor, super cool. People should definitely read more about them if you haven't. The Knights of Labor is effectively like the first kind of major labor union in the United States, right? It's fairly different from what we would sort of recognize now as a labor union, but these were the first kind of attempts. And in fact, one thing that's interesting about the Knights of Labor was it actually had an intention to try to organize labor across the board. It starts out as more of a kind of secret society than a labor organization. And that's one thing, as I know Matt knows and many of our listeners do as well. Back in the 1800s, people fucking loved secret societies. They also really loved them in the South. So the Knights of Labor, they used to have kind of secret clandestine meetings and secret handshakes, all this kind of stuff. Anyways, the Knights of Labor, as all this is going on, are now also experiencing the crushing weight of industrialization and changes that are happening in Texas and all across the country. And the railroad workers are taking on this guy, Gould, who is just one of the quintessential robber barons of all time. He's a railroad magnate, and they go on strike against him in 1885. And it ends up being successful in the sense that they say, okay, we'll accept some of your demands. But in many ways, that was just the precursor for the big strike in 1886, which is known as the Great Southwest Railroad Strike. Some people believe that Gould and his people kind of like acquiesced to their demands only to hit them back harder the next year. But again, these are people who are working in the towns, right? In places like Dallas, in places like Fort Worth, in places like in and around the kind of northern central Texas, so around Waco, right? So these are people who are not these kind of rural farmers, but are finding themselves up against those same kind of conditions.
Who was William Lamb?
My man. William Lamb, dude, was cool as hell. He was a tenant farmer. He was a traveling lecturer with the Farmers Alliance. So the Farmers Alliance is, again, as I was saying, like this kind of interesting political organization. But they really struggled in their first few years until they started creating what's called the traveling lecturer. And the traveling lecturer went across to all the different chapters and talked to different farmers and different communities about the crop lien system, connecting all the dots where people were feeling something was wrong, but actually saying, like, these are the things that are harming us, and these are the things we can do about them. Farmers Alliance wasn't just an organization where people went and complained together. They were trying to come up with solutions, right? So some of their solutions were trying to do things like bulking. The idea being that, like, hey, why don't we gather all of our cotton together and sell it as one, community. Cooperative stores. Really, a big part of this movement is a cooperative movement. Things that I think a lot of people advocate for today, and those were seen as the kind of solutions to both the financial crisis, the financial predators that were preying against the farmers, but also trying to inspire a kind of collective understanding and collective benefit for this class, because they recognize the reason that they were getting so screwed was because they were unorganized. And I believe it was S.O. Dawes, or maybe another one of the figures, I'd have to double check, who said something along the lines of, like, capital is like thoroughly organized at this time, like we're organized as well. And it's true, right? You had, like, the merchant classes were all organized together, and this was one of the problems with cooperative stores, right? Is like they try to open up cooperative stores, but the northeastern companies that would sell all the goods to those kind of stores, they would say, oh, well, we won't sell to these crazy radicals in the Farmers Alliance. We'll make sure that we sell them to, like, a good, sustainable merchant, right? And this is one of those kind of class solidarity things where the financial interests, the merchant classes, all kind of understood that they needed to choke out and break the Farmers Alliance. So William Lamb is one of those guys, but what he recognized more than anything was that they couldn't just be so narrow as to only focus on, like, the particular business conditions that farmers faced when they were selling their crops. He recognized that farmers were part of the same system of capitalism that was crushing the farmers, and it was the same system that was crushing the laborers. So he started to advocate not only just for like working class solidarity, but for these organizations to start operating politically. If they wanted to do big things like creating, state-owned, resources for the farmers, they would need the state. They would need to control the state to be able to do that, right? They would need to be able to break the power of the merchant classes. They would need to be able to enforce contracts on the railroad companies. So you need politics to do that. So he starts advocating for these organizations to start organizing politically, and specifically start organizing as third-party operations instead of just like a pressure group on the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and I mean, some of these demands here, the Cleburne demands, the one that I find really interesting, formation of a National Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Yeah.
If you want to touch a little bit more on some of their demands.
Yeah, so I mean, the Cleburne demands come last in the story. They come after the strike and William Lamb really bringing in these folks. But they're super interesting. We don't have to tell the whole story; people can read it. But the Cleburne demands is basically how the story ends, and I argue that the Cleburne demands are basically the kind of formation of the populist movement, right? Hell, if you read the Cleburne demands, you might find it to actually be a pretty compelling program for maybe even a political system today, right? You might have to tweak a couple things, but these are things that we also are wanting to fight for as well, right? And the Cleburne demands came from the Farmers Alliance, right? Which had up until this point considered itself to be a nonpartisan, non-really political organization. And they just got together in Cleburne, Texas, and they made these demands. The first thing that they demanded, and this is the solidarity part, was, I'll quote it here, "We demand of our state and national governments such legislation as shall secure to our people freedom from the onerous and shameful abuses that the industrial classes are now suffering at the hands of the arrogant capitalists and powerful corporations." And I just want people to sit with that for a second. That's in Texas, in Cleburne, Texas, to be specific, in 1886. This is an organization of farmers. They're talking about themselves as members of the industrial classes in opposition to the arrogant capitalists and powerful corporations. This was just a massive historical shift. And not only that, these people are talking about capitalism and stuff like this, but these farmers are seeing themselves not as farmers, or as petty bourgeois landowners, whatever terminology they would use, but as members of the working class, right? And they make specific demands. The first ones are demands that unions be recognized, that the protection that cooperative stores be recognized as well. Right, connecting the lack of recognition for their friends in the Knights of Labor, and the lack of respect for the cooperative organizations that they had started up themselves, right? But immediately, there isn't this strong distinction. And again, this is an organization. You could argue, why should they be talking about the interest of labor unions? They're not a labor union, but it was because they had that kind of fundamental understanding of political solidarity that I find is the fundamental key to the success and the appeal of populism, is that populism was able to unite folks who in other contexts could see themselves in conflict with one another, right? It's not hard to imagine, right? The railroads represent industrialization, urbanization, all the forces that are pushing people off of the land. There's this crisis in Texas at that moment where the railroad companies are gobbling up all the land in Texas. So you could argue as a farmer, they could have a position of being against the railroads in and of themselves, and particularly being against the railroad workers, right? Because those are the guys who are doing this kind of work. But that's not what ends up happening. Instead, they see solidarity with those folks and opposition to the ruling classes and to the Goulds instead of to their fellow workers in the city.
Yeah, and just to go back, we should go into how the sort of trajectory of the Great Southwest Strike and how it was ultimately suppressed.
It's great. So the Great Southwest Strike, yeah. And so basically, William Lamb is successful, and this is all before Cleburne demands come after. But William Lamb is successful in getting the Farmers Alliance to start standing up with the Knights of Labor, and Gould tries to starve out the workers. But because these workers now had friends who were farmers, these farmers start showing up at the picket lines and delivering food and feeding those workers. So, just a really beautiful image of solidarity, wherein, this arrogant capitalist, to use their words, was trying to starve out the working people. And he's unable to because of the solidarity with those folks. Now, unfortunately, that solidarity did not go, across the board, as there were many people, particularly the police and in the government, who want to destroy the Southwest strike. And one of the nastiest things is Governor Ireland of Texas used the Texas State Militia to break strikes, sent out the Texas Rangers against the strikers, long tradition of that in the state. And he even hired a known murderer named Jim Courtwright, who was acting as the city marshal in Fort Worth, and they killed a bunch of striking workers in broad daylight. And when a murderer is being hired and operating on two fronts, as both like an official, as a city marshal in the government, and also a hired killer for the railroad company, you're kind of outgunned at that moment. So the railroad workers lose the strike. But it is one of these moments that it becomes a learning moment for these movements, right? Just like the Pullman strike as well, in the near future would, that pushes this kind of railroad labor militancy into political action. In fact, Martin Irons, who is the leader of the Great Southwest Strike, who is buried near me, actually, in Waco, Texas, ends up not only being a figure in the populist movement, but even as an old man, as one of the founders of the Socialist Party of Texas. And I believe Eugene Debs said about him, you could see the devastation of years and years of conflict with the capitalist class. But when he spoke of socialism, his eyes lit up, and you could tell that this was a true fighter for the working people. So, these are our political ancestors. This is our political tradition, not just in Texas, but nationally. And I think it's really important to remember these folks and these stories, because there's been a lot of effort to try to silence these folks, both when they were living, but then erase them from the political record. And that goes from people in the ruling, class, and people who have influence over what gets taught and what doesn't get taught in schools. But also, people in our own movements who have an inability to kind of look back and take these connections and lessons from these moments, because I really think it's important for us to be able to stand on our own 2 feet and in a very strong tradition of folks who have stood up against these systems.
Yeah, I mean, for all of the theoretical and practical hurdles to these sorts of things, they bear out when you look at the history of it. We already mentioned the DFL. How did the Democrat farm labor? How did that become a thing? It's because this sort of synthesis is the only thing that's really put a mark on this country in the positive direction.
100%. So folks, and also I will just say this, I didn't include in the piece, but William Lamb, I find to just be a really compelling character, and he has a kind of a tragic story. I end the piece by noting that he is presiding over the meeting of the founding of the People's Party of Texas, a party that will shake up the entire political scene in this state and also nationally, right? This is the beginning of the populist movement that will then lead into the progressive era. And then many of these things, not only do we have the history of the Socialist Party of Texas and the the Socialist Party of America, this is also the beginnings of what will become New Deal liberalism, right? But William Lamb is always advocating for this third party. He founds it with many other people, the People's Party of Texas, in the 1890s, presides over the meeting. It only takes a couple years before some nasty-ass Democrat lawyers sue him for libel and completely devastate and destroy him. So he's this kind of really compelling figure because he fights for this, he builds it, it ends up happening, and he gets kind of pushed out of society and politics because of his commitment to these things. He lives a very long time, even though he stops doing politics, and won actually many prizes in local and state fairs for his fruits, his hybridization of different fruits.
Oh, hell yeah.
That. So he keeps on kicking. But I find William Lamb to be a very interesting character, and I would like him to have a little bit of space in people's hearts because, he was very long-sighted on a lot of these things.
That's a good backstory. Some of the North Dakota guys they kind of went the wrong direction. They weren't making nice prize-winning fruits and vegetables. They were, maybe getting to be a little bit cranks and even maybe doing anti-communist propaganda later.
There's plenty of that shit that happened in Texas too. Don't get me wrong. But
yeah.
As far as I know, William Lamb was mainly focused on growing pears and shit.
Awesome, man.
Well, thanks. Thank y'all for letting me get into that. Yeah, the piece is called "Populism Was Born from a Rural-Urban Alliance," and it's just a small taste of many of the stories that will be in my upcoming book on Texas's radical political history. But I won't. That's enough on that, folks. We're going to go over to the post game, patreon.com/leftreckoning. It's a continuous stream, so you jump right over there. Make sure that you get access. Go over to Patreon. You can flip over. Matt and I got the post game. We got a lot of fun quotes and videos and things like that. We'll also be taking y'all's questions. So we appreciate all of y'all. And I will just say, I don't have much to add, but as people probably know, last weekend was the 5-year anniversary of Michael's passing, and it's a hard one and a heavy one. It's one I've actually been kind of anxious about for a very long time, but it was very nice hearing from many of y'all and from friends and family, and we keep Michael's work and life and perspective in our hearts. And I think that, I wish I could hear his voice again. I wish I could have him with us still in the fight. But I'm very, very appreciative of the fact that I was able to be with him for as long as I was. He really made an impact, not just on myself personally, but on so many people all across the globe. And, I know that he was very proud of that, and he should be.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have, a couple of those hours of pre-show prep every once in a while.
I agree.
Talk about shit in an unfiltered way, but yeah.
It's too bad, though. He always talked about when, New York becomes this communist, state, the nice life high on the hog that he was going to be living, and I hope I hope Zoran is bringing that in, and I'm just sad that Michael's not going to be able there to enjoy the fruits of all that work.
I mean, Michael talking to Zoran would have been a awesome show that we would have definitely got done. I mean, we would have done that last year.
Yeah, no, we probably would have had somebody like Zoran on the program, regularly. I mean, that was one of the things that was also happening, back then. But we appreciate all of y'all. Well, folks, we're going to jump over. Thank you all so much for listening and tuning in. We'll be going to the post game, keeping the cameras on, everything going. So patreon.com/leftreckoning, jump on over. We're going to be turning the lights out on the folks on the free stream on Twitch, and also on the public stream on YouTube. So get over the post game and
just a second. Patrons, just stay tuned.